Hi, my name is Practical Tass, and I would like to talk about controllers. Over the last several years, the Melee community has seen the introduction of a wide variety of custom controllers, including both hardware mods to the standard GameCube controller form factor, as well as the rise of Leverless, also known as rectangle or box controllers. Many controller manufacturers understand that their devices are capable of significantly better performance relative to even the best OEM GameCube controllers, and so willingly nerf their devices. Many tournaments, however, have little or no regulation on these controllers besides what the manufacturers and players self-impose, other than limitations on macros. This has led to an uneasy arms race, where manufacturers wish to release the best controller possible, and players wish to use those controllers, but nobody wants to push too far too quickly and risk tournament organizers drawing a black and white line in the current gray area to ban some or all of these controllers. This situation has slowly become untenable, so my team and I have been working to outline acceptable and unacceptable configurations for all third-party controllers in the form of a rule set. This rule set seeks to modernize Melee's controller rules and level the playing field for all controller types. As of the release of this video, this process is complete and the rule set has been submitted to major tournament organizers for review. First, I'll go over the important restrictions that cover third-party GCC-like controllers. Some of these, most notably the Goomwave, have behaviors that we consider ban-worthy. Some specific culprits include Goomwave's easy up tilt and easy dash back out of crouch, where the controller detects incorrect inputs that look similar to an intended up tilt or dash back respectively, and instead tells Melee that the input was performed properly. While these behaviors can be turned off, the Goomwave also performs other input adjustments that are impossible to detect and result in a controller that is far stronger than an OEM. For these reasons, the rule set will ban official Goomwave firmware, but this does not prevent someone from writing compliant firmware that can be used with existing Goomwave hardware. Also, some GCC-like controllers have the ability to recalibrate your notches. That is, you can tell your controller what value you want each notch to have. The rule set does not ban this. Instead, it sets reasonable limits to how far a notch can be calibrated away from its true location and enforces that the notch cannot change mid-game. In other words, calibrated notches don't provide an in-game advantage over physical notches, so they can stay legal. The rule set will require that all third-party controllers make some specific parts of their firmware's source code available for inspection. And to facilitate enforcement, Alt F4 has graciously built us an input checker, which tournament organizers can quickly use to detect whether each player is using an analog controller or a leverless controller, and whether or not it believes they are running non-compliant firmware. Second, Swift has graciously agreed to provide his perspective on the parts of the rule set that impact leverless controllers. I'm very grateful for the time and effort he's taken to test our firmware, provide his feedback, and contribute to this video.
Hi, my tag is Swift, and I've been asked to help explain the new box rule set made by PTAS and his team of controller modders. I'm not personally a part of that team, but I've been playtesting the new firmware and following its development for almost 2 years now. I think they did a really good job and that this will be a very positive thing for the community. Digital controllers would have probably gotten banned as a whole if it weren't for the nerfs, so I think this is also in the best interest of digital controller players as well. Goal with the nerfs is to bring digital controllers to a level more on par with GameCube controllers. I think even with the nerfs, digital controllers still offer some advantages over normal GameCube controllers. From a player's perspective, it feels more difficult to use and it takes a bit of getting used to. I still feel like I can play the same way, but I have to earn certain things a bit more, and a lot of the egregious box stuff has been toned down more to the level of a GameCube controller. Okay, so I have two controllers here. This box is not nerfed and this prism is nerfed, so I'm going to use the two to compare. So the first thing that we'll talk about is SOCD, and SOCD basically refers to what happens when you're holding opposite directions down on the controller. So say if I'm holding left and then I press right, what's going to happen? If I press down, then I'm pressing up. So currently, box controllers have it set to a mode called second input priority, which has it so that whatever your second input is going to completely override your initial movement button and you're going to move that direction. So basically, I'm holding left and then I press right and then it'll just cancel out and make me move right. So this makes movement a lot more lenient, and it's part of why box players move around much quicker in general than controller players. And also opens the door like a really easy way to ledge dash by using the SOCD. There you go. Neutral SOCD will now be what's required. So if you're holding down one direction and you press the opposite direction, they'll both cancel each other out. This requires a bit more deliberate inputs for the player, and it puts more skill into quickly changing directions. This grid represents the analog stick of a GameCube controller. Analog controllers are at the mercy of polling in that the game can pull the controller while a player is moving their stick. For example, If I'm moving my stick over here, I'm physically putting my stick over all of these values in between. And in that time, the game can pull my controller when it's somewhere over here or here. Box controllers don't have this. They just go from here and then warp to their desired value. This makes digital controllers quicker and more precise than GameCube controllers. The solution to this is a simulated travel time. When you move the control stick with the digital button, instead of the output instantly jumping to the target coordinate, the controller must output a series of values that sweep from the initial location to the target location over the course of 6 to 12 milliseconds. That way, the game has the same chance of pulling your controller at one of these intermediate values, similar to a GameCube controller. Next, I'm going to talk about input fuzzing. All of these little gray squares on this controller grid represent different values on the analog stick. Since there are so many of these tiny little areas so close to each other, it's basically impossible to consistently aim for the same specific coordinate over and over again. Trying to do so will result in you hitting all the coordinates around that area and sometimes hitting that same coordinate, but it's never consistent. Digital controllers don't have this problem. When digital controllers have a coordinate set, it is the exact same coordinate every single time. To account for this, the targeted coordinate will now be in the center of a 3x3 grid of coordinates that will be chosen at random. On the diagram here, the red is the target and the pink is the grid. The grid to the left represents the chance of each coordinate being output, with the target being the center. In the grand scheme of the entire controller, this range is so minor that it's not noticeable in normal gameplay while still preventing certain coordinate perfect tech. Next, I'll go over angle limitations. As it currently stands, there are no actual limitations for what angles a player can put on their controller. The Ruleset has made the cutoff for legal recovery angles 20 degrees. For context, the shortest angle possible on a GameCube controller is 17 degrees, while the default box angle is 23 degrees. The decision to not have the cutoff at the default 23 degrees was due to the common sentiment that edgeguarding digital controller players was much easier, and Firefox notches have become very prevalent in top-level play. There will also be an angle limitation on wave dashes, with the longest possible wave dash being 27 degrees. For context, the current default box wave dash is 30 degrees. Different characters sometimes prefer different wave dash angles, so two firmwares will be released, one with a 27 degree wave dash and one with a 30 degree wave dash. Due to fuzzing, you won't get the exact same angle each time, and the ranges of the longest to shortest wave dash length for both firmwares is on the right. There's also going to be lockouts implemented. So there's SDI lockouts that prevent getting egregious amounts of SDI. It's hard to get an example of it side by side, but from experience it definitely feels like it's worse. Another lockout will be a pivot up tilt and a pivot down tilt lockout. There's also a lockout on crouch up tilt that has you jump if you do it too fast. There will also be restrictions imposed on the button layout that you can have. You cannot change the C-stick and A-button location. This is primarily done to prevent the abuse of ASDI down by preventing players from putting the C-stick down button in a much more convenient spot on the controller. For example, if you have a layout like this, abusing ASDI down is much easier since it frees up your thumb to do work with the other C-stick buttons in A while your ring finger alone is messing with C-stick down. The last thing I'll go over is a restriction on the amount of modifiers that you can have. If you have 2 modifiers, then you can use the C-stick in conjunction with the modifier to change your angles. If you have more than 2 modifiers, you cannot use the C-stick to adjust your angles. This only applies to a small subset of Smashbox users, since every other commonly used digital controller already follows this rule. Those are the major points in the new rule set. If you'd like to know more, feel free to check out the full rule set documentation that will probably be linked to this video. Thank you to the team that volunteered their time to put this together. I think it really paid off, and thank you for listening.
Thanks again, Swift, for your help. It's our team's opinion that even with all of these restrictions, Leverless controllers still have plenty of advantages over GCC likes. They still enjoy the consistency and precision benefits inherent to using digital controllers in an analog game. Overall, we believe that Leverless controllers using compliant firmware are competitive with GCC likes, and many players will still prefer them, but not due to a difference in overall power level. Thank you for watching. If you have follow-up questions, please check the summarized version of the rules or the full rules, both linked in the description.